remind ourselves, because the big story for me still around Keir Starmer is why he said nothing about the Supreme Court ruling which was handed down last Wednesday about trans women not being women. Because, you know, what I've been saying since that day, surely the Prime Minister, who loves the law, should come out and talk about how much he loves the law, should come out and say how much the law is important to him, how it pretty much frames everything that he does, that a legal framework is all that he requires in order to operate as the Prime Minister of this country. Check it out.
This is not a law-free zone.
I had to observe the law of the land.
The law applies online.
And the law must be upheld everywhere. And having applied the law,
Those involved in the process who will feel the full force of the law.
That is the law of the land that is in place for the reasons I've set out to protect the integrity of the system.
Whatever they claim as their motive will feel the full force of the law. It's important I report that.
Honesty, decency, truth, and the rule of law.
the court found it unlawful.
The full force of the law.
This democratic country is built on the rule of law. So if the law needs to change, then we will change it, and quickly.
I'm absolutely clear that no laws were broken.
Yes. So this is day 6, James. Very good morning to you, and
Morning.
had a very nice Easter. Day 6 of Keir Starmer failing to say anything at all about what I would regard, as far as he's concerned, one of the more significant rulings of the Supreme Court in recent history. What's going on?
Well, I think two things, Mike. I mean, obviously there's the convenience of the calendar in the sense of having the parliamentary recess and Good Friday, bank holiday yesterday, which means, of course, he hasn't had to come to the House, for instance, to PMQs on a Wednesday yet thus far. But the second thing I do think is involved here, Mike, is that politics, really, and you saw this in some of the leaked WhatsApps splashed on the front of the Mail on Sunday 2 days ago, which is that a number of Labour MPs feel deeply uncomfortable with the ramifications of this ruling, and I don't think he's in any great rush to get it out and talk about it, given, of course, how much we know the trans issue has caused him problems and headaches before.
Yes, exactly right. But also, not just caused him problems and headaches, but he has actively spoken in favour of trans rights. He said trans rights are human rights. He struggled to define a woman for a very long time. When he finally got around to saying a woman is a biologically born woman, he still said that there were some women who could have a penis. You know, he's never been completely on side with the, what you might call biological argument, that only women, as the Supreme Court said, who are born biological women can actually be women. I mean, he would have to admit that he was wrong in law. And I think that's what's causing him such angst and such, you know, hesitation, because he doesn't like admitting that he's been wrong. And he doesn't like admitting that, you know, he's now going to have to change his mind.
Absolutely, and I think this is a very thorny political minefield, has been for a number of years, and it was really embarrassing the number of years, I think 3.5, 4 years it took before he could finally say that adult human women don't have penises. And yet there are still members of his cabinet who are saying similar things up until the point almost when they got elected. I'd be interested to see if, you know, your great colleague Julia Hartley-Brewer does a famous question about what is a woman and asks to remember the cabinet. I'm not sure all of them could answer that even now.
Even now, no. They would still humming and hawing and saying, oh, it's a very difficult question, very complex. It's like, it's not complex at all. You know, the Supreme Court, who are hardly the bastions of the right wing, have come out and made it very clear. You know, a woman can only be a biologically born woman. It's as simple as that, i.e. trans women are not women. It shouldn't even really be a massive national debate. But because of the fact that politicians, and some of them on the Conservative Party as well, have made such a sort of dog's breakfast of it all, it's become a big deal.
And I think we've got to also remember, of course, that this has been completely left to the lawyers to interpret because of Parliament's failure here. And it was two signal acts. One was the 2004 Gender Recognition Act, the other was the 2010 Equality Act. Labour often likes to take great pride in both of those, but there was a conflict inherently at the heart of that about who would qualify for one of the gender recognition certificates and what services were they able to access, given, of course, the Equality Act makes explicit provision for single-sex spaces. So it's been a real legal mess here, and if I were Keir Starmer, I wouldn't necessarily be in a rush to get out a comment on this, given, however, whatever he says is going to provoke a backlash from either his party's left or the party's right.
Yeah, but the problem he's got is that it's not going to go away, and he can't keep hiding in the basement and pretending it's not happening, because we've got the pro-trans brigade talking this morning about taking their protest, which was a quite substantial one on Saturday in London, all around the country.
Yep. They want to have lots of protests. I saw sort of smaller ones in Bristol, for instance, were sort of encouraged by the local Green MP there. I mean, there's also been some talk. I don't think this will happen, but of course, the Scottish government stopped their legal challenge at the Supreme Court in the UK.
Yeah.
There is some talk perhaps about potentially taking somehow that challenge up to the European Court on Human Rights. So that might be another legal battle to get over. But as you say, Mike, I mean, the people who are campaigning for this, they aren't going to change their minds on this anytime soon. And I suspect what we might see is a sort of political support switch from some of these activists from the Labour Party to the Green Party, for instance.
Yeah, and that's, again, problematic for Starmer, and if he can't show leadership on this, I wonder if, it weakens his position as Prime Minister.
I think that it's one of those sort of second or third tier issues in British politics, which sometimes flares up and can cause real problems. We saw it back in 2023 with the Gender Recognition Reform Act in Scotland, and that put a big dent in the SNP. I think that, given the strides gone to this, and given also, you say about how much Number 10 are trying to make it out as though that the Prime Minister's been on a great journey about this. There was some briefing in the Times last week talking about how he's gone from being a student activist in 2020 to being a statesman in sort of 2023, 2024. I mean, if they're leaning into this, I mean, let's see that statesmanship rather than sort of briefing about it to the papers.
Well, this is it. I mean, it's a great opportunity for him to show that he is a good leader, but in fact, he's absolutely not showing that, and quite the reverse. He's proving himself to be weak and sort of lily-livered and frightened of taking on even the people in his own party who don't agree with the ruling. Surely he should be saying to them, as we in our little montage there suggested, this is the law of the land. This is not a law-free zone. The law is very clear. All of those things that he said in the past apply to this.
Yeah, and the unanimous decision as well. I think, although it was obviously very thorny issues and went into some detail about that, it was quite clear in what it said. And I do think what's striking is, reading some of the comment pieces around this. There's a piece by one of the Equality and Human Rights Commission today in the Times, and setting out very clear what this means in terms of public service provision, what it means for things like hospital wards and sort of jails, etc. Yeah. And so I think for them, it's also about sort of getting the politics right, but also I think some of the Labour MPs need to get their head around what it means in terms of provision. And a lot of stuff that these organisations have been saying or insinuating at for the past decade, it turns out to be wrong.
And they have to get their heads out of the student common room and actually start admitting that they're now in the government and they're in the real world. And most people think that the Supreme Court ruling was actually common sense.
Yeah, and I think that you can also see that in terms of the way in which a lot of the sort of campaigners around this have said, finally, you have vindication, people have lost jobs for this, etc. But I mean, obviously, I think that politicians always like to say they'll go along with the court ruling just until the point where the court doesn't happen to agree with it. Yes. And I think for a long time, Keir Starmer's basically instincts were baked into law, from the 90s to the 2000s. He was a human rights lawyer, very happy going with the great grain and flow and thread of that. Yes. Now we're seeing the court coming back with decisions he doesn't like. I'll be interested to see what that means, or allegedly doesn't like. Yeah,
no, I think it's hilarious that the Supreme Court, the creation of Tony Blair, which, as I said, is hardly right-wing, has kind of hoisted him with his own petard, and he doesn't really know what to do about it. Let's talk about Rachel Reeves. She's off to Washington today to do God knows what. The American economy's sort of up and down like, well, I don't want to say what it's up and down like, but you know what I mean. Basically, she flies into DC. There's more chaos in the markets. I don't know whether she's got a scheduled meeting with Donald Trump or whether she's just going to see J.D. Vance or the head of the Treasury. I'm not really sure. But, it's a tough call for her to get anything out of it, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I suspect she'll be meeting with Scott Bessent, who's her US Treasury equivalent. I think that it just does show that two things, one of which is the primacy of the US economy, which is our biggest single trading partner to the UK. And the second of all, the importance that, sort of the classic line is when America sneezes, the rest of the world catches the cold. And so much of the sort of world trade policy still does flow through the United States. So I suspect there'll be a variety of different things to do with sort of where the US Trump administration is going. I also think there's a lot of speculation in Whitehall that a sort of quite a narrow, quite a shallow trade deal is expected to be signed over the next coming weeks. But of course, President Trump loves the sequencing. He loves the show of it all. So the ball's very much in the Americans' court on all that. But we're expected to see some talk around that. So I think trade will be top of the agenda, and probably as second order also just sort of global stability, really, in terms of all those tariffs as well.
Yeah, and just because I like to have a pop at Ed Miliband at every opportunity, great story in the Telegraph this morning about a bloke by the name of Nigel Topping, who is one of the 6 members of Ed Miliband's Climate Change Committee, has busied himself over the last year racking up 40,000 air miles flying to environmental conferences as far away as Abu Dhabi, Azerbaijan and South America.
I mean, if you're a cynic, you might say the more time he's out the country, the less damage he can do here. But as you say, sort of hardly practicing what they preach. And, you think given all the amounts of stuff we went through with COVID, with virtual summits, etc., how many of these trips are necessary, and are they really sort of ensuring value for money at the taxpayers' expense?
Yeah, absolutely right. Couldn't agree more. James Heale, good to talk to you. Political correspondent of The Spectator. Thank you very much indeed.